Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Shri Guru Pranama prayers ki jai. Shri Brahma Samhita ki jai. Ishwara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakaranam Chintamani Prakarasadma Sakalpa Vriksha Laksha Bride Susurabir Abhipadiyantam Lakshmi Sahasra Satasam Brahma Sevimana Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Jami Venam Gananda Ravinda Dalaitaksham Arhavatam Samasitam Sundarangam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandrika Sadvanamali Vamsi Ratnam Gadam Pranay Keli Kalavilasam Shaman Tribanga Lalita Lita Prakasam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasya Sakalentri Vrittimanti Pasyanti Pantika Yanti Chiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vikrahasya Govinda Mahadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Ananta Rupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayuvanam Cha Vedesa Durlabam Adurlabam Atma Bhakto Govinda Mahadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastakoti Satavatsara Sampragamyo Vayo Ratapi Manaso Munipungamana Sokyasti Yat Prapadasim Yavichintya Tatve Govinda Mahadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Saura Chaitam Jagadanda Kotim Yes Chakti Rasti Jagadanda Chaya Yadanta Andanta Rasta Paramanu Chayantarastam Govinda Mahadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manijasta Taiva Samprab Rupa Mahima Sanyada Bhusa Suktarya Meva Nikama Pratitai Stuvanti Govinda Mahadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Patibhavita Bistabirya Eva Nijarupa Tayakalabi Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhutto Govinda Mahadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Patibhavita Bistabirya Eva Nijarupa Tayakalabi Goloka Evanim Sata Kilatma Bhutto Govinda Mahadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santak Sadeva Hidesu Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam Govinda Mahadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murti Sukala Nimenitistan Nana Avatar Makarud Bhuvanesa Kintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Pamamyo Govinda Mahadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Did we get all of it? Did we do all the verses? Yeah. Okay. Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme Godhead. He has an eternal blissful spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin, and he is the prime cause of all causes. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor, who is tending the cows, yielding all desire in abodes built with spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of purpose trees, always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds of thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is adept in playing on his flute, with blooming eyes like lotus petals, with head decked with peacock's feathers, with the figure of beauty tinged with the hue of blue clouds, and his unique loveliness charming millions of cupids. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, round whose neck is swinging a garland of flowers beautified with the moon locket, whose two hands are adorned with the flute and jeweled ornaments, who always revels in pastimes of love, whose graceful threefold bending form, Sham Sundara, is eternally manifest. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, whose transcendental form is full of bliss, truth, and substantiality, and is thus full of the most dazzling splendor. Each of the limbs of that transcendental figure possesses in himself the full-fledged functions of all the organs, and eternally sees, maintains, and manifests the infinite universes, both spiritual and mundane. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is inaccessible to the Vedas, but obtainable by pure, unalloyed devotion of the soul, who is without a second, who is not subject to decay, is without a beginning, whose form is endless, who is the beginning and the eternal Purusha. Yet He is a person possessing the beauty of blooming youth. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, only the tip of the toe of whose lotus feet is approached by the yogis who aspire after the transcendental and betake themselves to pranayama by drilling the respiration, or by the jnanis who try to find out the non-differentiated Brahman by the process of elimination of the mundane, extending over thousands of millions of years. He is an undifferentiated entity, as there is no distinction between potency and the possessor thereof. In his work of creation of millions of worlds, his potency remains inseparable. All the universes exist in him, and he is present in his fullness in every one of the atoms that are scattered throughout the universe at one and the same time. Such is the primeval Lord whom I adore. I adore the same Govinda, the primeval Lord, in whose praise men who are imbued with devotion sing the mantra suktas told by the Vedas, by gaining their appropriate beauty, greatness, thrones, conveyances, and ornaments. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, residing in his own realm, Goloka, with Radha resembling his own spiritual figure, the embodiment of the ecstatic potency possessed of the 64 artistic activities in the company of her confidants, the Sakis, embodiments of the extensions of her bodily form, permeated and vitalized by his ever-blissful spiritual rasa. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is Shamsundara, Krishna himself, with inconceivable, innumerable attributes, whom the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts, with the eye of devotion tinged with the salve of love. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who manifested himself personally as Krishna, and the different avatars in the world in the forms of Rama, Nrsimha, Ramana, etc., as his subjective portions. Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Gaura Premanandi Hari Bol. Okay, I have something to give everybody. I have to get a stapler. But I don't have one. This is what we're studying. Okay, so there are two places where the 18 or 20 points of knowledge are explained. One is in the Bhagavad Gita and one is in Sri Ishopanishad. So I today gave you the what's called 18 points of knowledge from the Sri Ishopanishad. We're going to make it into 20, but anyway, I just want to tell you there's two places where this is explained, one in the Bhagavad Gita and one in the Ishopanishad. Okay, so just as a little summary of what we've been studying, because this is high quality knowledge, so it requires some repetition to understand. If you understand these things, you become very, very advanced in Krishna consciousness. So, we'll look at the first page. It begins with the Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter, 5th verse. And it says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the highest authority in explaining this knowledge. Still, as a matter of course, learned scholars and standard authorities always give evidence from previous authorities. Okay, now that's a very important point. Krishna is explaining this most controversial point regarding the duality and non-duality of the soul and the supersoul by referring to a scripture, the Vedanta, which is accepted as authority. First, he says, this is according to different sages. As far as the sages are concerned, besides himself, meaning Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra, is a great sage, and in the Vedanta Sutra, duality is perfectly explained. And Vyasadeva's father, Parasara, is also a great sage, and he writes in his books of religiosity, Aham Tvam Cha Tatanye, we, you, I, and the various other living entities are all transcendental, although in material bodies. Now we are fallen into the ways of the three modes of material nature according to our different karma. As such, some are on higher levels and some are on the lower nature. The higher and lower natures exist due to ignorance and are being manifested in an infinite number of living entities. But the supersoul, which is infallible, is uncontaminated by the three qualities of nature and is transcendental. Similarly, in the original Vedas, a distinction between the soul, the supersoul, and the body is made, especially in the Katha Upanishad. There are many great sages who have explained this, and Parasara is considered principal among them. The word Chandobi refers to the various Vedic literatures. The Taittiriya Upanishad, for example, which is a branch of the Yajur Veda, describes nature and the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so what is this talking about? This, in other words, this is the beginning of the explanation of what's called the field of activity. What is the field of activity? It's the 24 elements of the material body. That's where material activities take place. Your body, my body, is made of these 24 elements, and we're engaged in all kinds of different activities in the material world. But there's a duality, and that is there's a difference between our body and our soul. Most people don't understand that, but in order to understand what is our real position in this world, we have to study this to see that there is a difference between our eternal soul and the material body. And all the activities that we're performing in the material body, with the material body in the material world, can be either spiritual or material. For most people, it's only material, and therefore they're stuck in the process of birth and death. But for devotees, it's spiritual activity, and the difference of these two is going to be explained here in this chapter in great detail. Now, the problem is the field of activity, 24 elements, are being controlled by the modes of material nature, the three modes. And because of that, we're being controlled, and we don't realize it. However, it's possible to rise above the influence of these three modes by becoming Krishna conscious, where we're no longer controlled by them. Now, by Krishna consciousness, we become controlled completely by the mercy of Krishna. And therefore, we're no longer a prisoner in this body. We use the body only for Krishna consciousness. And that way we become free of the cycle of birth and death. Okay. So now, it says, understand what is Brahman, spiritual truth. Three levels of realization: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So, then it says, as stated before, Kshetra is the field of activities. So Kshetra is a Sanskrit word to represent what? The 24 elements in the material world. And that's called the field of activities. All the activities we do is in this body, and based on and in order to do them, we have these 24 elements, which we're going to name in a minute. Kshetra is the field of activities, and there are two kinds of Kshetragya. Kshetragya means who knows the field of activities. So who are these two knowers? One is you and me. We are an individual soul, or jivas, and the other is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's also present as Paramatma, so he knows our body perfectly, and he knows all people's bodies. We only know our own body, and even that we don't understand completely. And then it says, as stated in the Taittiriya Upanishad 2.5, Brahma Pucham Pratistha, there is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord's energy known, okay, so this Brahma Pucham means the 5 levels of realization of Brahman, or the absolute truth. So, and the full spectrum of the Absolute Truth is Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. The impersonal effulgence coming from Krishna's body, the all-present Paramatma in the soul, in every atom of the universe and in the heart of every living entity, and then ultimately Bhagavan or Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who's the source of everything. So now we're going to study the Brahma Pucham, these 5 levels of material and spiritual consciousness. And the first is called Anamoya, dependence upon food for existence. So this is the first level of realizing God. And we discussed this yesterday, but we're just going over it really quick. Okay, here. So this anamoya is dependence on food for existence. And this is a materialistic realization of the Supreme. In other words, it's a first step in realizing God. So the little baby, immediately he's looking for food, and he finds it in the breast of his mother, or he gets it from his mother. And that for him is like God, because his whole life depends on it. Then there's pranamoya, or after realizing the supreme absolute truth in food, one can realize the absolute truth in living symptoms or life forms. So there's the mother, but also there's the father, there's the uncle, there's the auntie. There are different relatives and friends. So the scope of the child's consciousness increases to living forms. And then the third step of realization is jnanamoya, when the child extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. So that is a very profound, let's say, step, but it's still material. Right? And then beyond that, the next supreme stage is anandamaya, realization, then next stage is vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. That means we begin to understand, I'm not this body. I have an eternal soul, which is the real me. And then after that, it's anandamoya, realization of the all-spiritual, all-blissful nature of associating with Krishna and his transcendental devotees in the spiritual world and even in the material world. And so these are 5 stages of Brahman realization, or realization of the supreme absolute truth. Brahman, Paramatma, and eventually Bhagavan. So, in other words, unless we come to the level of this transcendental bliss, we never really get fixed in Krishna consciousness. And to get to that level, one must be engaged in devotional service in the association of genuine devotees under the tutelage of bona fide spiritual masters. So all this is going to be explained now. So it says, transcendental. So it says, out of these 5 stages of Brahman realization, the first 3, Anamaya, Pranamaya, and Jnanamaya, in other words, realizing God is food, realizing the life symptoms or different people are existing, and then realizing the difference between, also beyond the living symptoms or many other living entities, the living entity understands that he or she has thinking, feeling, and willing. And they start doing that. We start thinking about things, feeling things, and then willing things, and then from those 3 let's say, psychological steps, one goes to acting. And then Vijnanamaya, one realizes that there's a difference between the mind and the soul, or the body and the soul. The mind is the subtle part of the body, and the gross part of the body, and both of those are different than the soul that one has. And then after that, one comes to the level of Krishna consciousness of experiencing transcendental bliss always because of devotional service and pure love for Krishna. So when we get to Anandamaya, the fifth step, that is complete transcendental experience of consciousness. And the Vedanta Sutra also describes the Supreme by saying, Anandamaya Vyasat, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is by nature full of joy. To enjoy his transcendental bliss, he expands into Vijnanamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, and Anamaya. So Krishna is present in all these stages of consciousness, but three of those stages are material. The fourth is the is the segue to spiritual life, and then the fifth is pure spiritual life. In the field of activities, the living entity is considered to be the enjoyer. So, Anamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, one is considered to be the enjoyer. And different from him is the Anandamaya. That means that if the living entity decides to enjoy and dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, or Krishna, in bliss, then he becomes perfect. This is the real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field, the living entity as a subordinate knower, and the nature of the field of activities, the 24 elements. One has to search for this truth in the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra. So the Vedanta Sutra is this very philosophical book written by Vyasa David that explains these things. It is mentioned here that the codes of Brahma Sutra are very nicely arranged according to cause and effect. Some of the sutras or aphorisms are Na Vidyad Ashrute. Well, that first aphorism is a short phrase that has a lot of big meaning to it, right? So all the verses of this Vedanta Sutra are like that. They're short phrases that have huge meanings. So the first aphorism, or the first, let's say, big meaning statement is this Na Vidyad Ashrute, which refers to the field of activities, the body, and the 24 elements of the body. Actually, there's a typo mistake. It's not 2 elements of the body, it's 24 elements of the body. And then the second is Atmatma Shrute. It indicates the living entity, or the jiva, as the individual spirit spark, or individual living entity. And then the third indicates the Supreme Lord, the summum bonum, or the highest level of spiritual realization among all the manifestations of various entities, the Supreme Lord who is always enjoying blissful pastimes in the spiritual world. Okay, so this is an understanding of these 5 levels of consciousness. And the 5th level is pure Krishna consciousness, where we become ecstatic always. So now we're going to study each step. So the first step are the 24 elements in the material world that make up the material body. So this is explained in the 13th chapter, 6th and 7th verse. We've gone over this before, but this is so that you can have this information in your hand and be able to look at it and gradually assimilate it. So it says that the 5 great elements, then false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses and the mind, the 5 sense objects. So this is the verse 13, 6, and 7. But to summarize it easier, I've written here 5 Mahabhutas, great elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. 5 knowledge-acquiring senses: eyes, ears, tongue, skin, nose. 5 objects of the senses: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. 5 working senses: voice, legs, hands, anus, genitals. Okay, so that's 20 elements of the material body. And then the subtle senses: mind, which is called the sense within, because the mind is receiving information from the other senses, right? The eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. So it's called the sense within. The intelligence and the false ego. And then the 24th element of the material world is the unmanifested stage of the three modes of nature. And this is called the pradhana. And then the unmanifested state becomes manifest. That's called the mahatattva. I should have put that there. I'll have to correct this. And then it says the aggregate of these 24 elements is called, it's called the aggregate of 24 elements is called the field of activity. So our body is where we act. And it's called the field of activity, and it's made up of these 24 material elements. Now we understand the difference between the body and the soul. And it's a very analytical process. So then it says, from all the authoritative statements of the great sages, the Vedic hymns, and the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra, the components of this world can be understood as follows. First, there are earth, water, fire, air, ether. These are the five great elements, Mahabhuta. Then there are false ego, intelligence, and the unmanifested stage of the three modes of nature. Then there are five senses for acquiring knowledge, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin. Then five working senses, voice, legs, hands, anus, and genitals. Then above the senses there is the mind, which is within, and which can be called the sense within. Therefore, including the mind, there are 11 senses altogether. Then there are the five objects of the senses, smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. Now the aggregate of these 24 elements is called the field of activity. If one makes an analytical study of these 24 elements, then he can very well understand the field of activity, meaning the body. So I simplified it a little bit above. 5, 5, 5, 5, 20, and then 3, and then 1, 24. Now, besides this, there's also what's called interactions. Then there's our desire and hatred, and happiness and distress. So we're experiencing this in this body. Desire and hatred, happiness and distress. These are interactions which represent the five great elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, in the gross body. The living symptoms are represented by consciousness and convictions. Convictions are things you're convinced of. You believe them, whether they're true or not true. But they're things that you believe. And consciousness means your awareness of things. Right? So these are called the living symptoms, represented by consciousness and convictions. And they're manifestations of the subtle body. So the happiness and distress, the desire and hatred are interactions which represent the five great elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether. And then the subtle, the subtle body, represented by consciousness and convictions, represents the mind, ego, or mind, intelligence, and ego. And these subtle elements are included within the field of activities because we're experiencing them. The five great elements are a gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, or the beginning of false ego, which is technically called the materialistic conception, or tamasa buddhi, intelligence and ignorance. So that is the material concept, which is in that fourth panel. We've gone over it twice already. We don't have to go over it again. But that is the beginning of the false ego, all these false concepts. If you have a false ego, then you develop all these false concepts also. It's called the material concept of life, or tamasa buddhi, intelligence and ignorance. So you have to be intelligent to be able to make all this list of nonsense things, right? But it's intelligence and ignorance. It's not intelligence and spiritual life. Right? And you see, there's a lot of this tamasa buddhi in society today. It's all over the place. People are making all kinds of theories all the time. And most of them are all completely wrong and misleading. Okay, and this further represents the unmanifested stage of the three modes of material nature. The unmanifested modes of material nature are called the pradhana. So you have an unmanifest stage of the three modes, then you have the manifest stage of the three modes, in which you encounter this tamasa, buddhi, intelligence, and ignorance. And then to the false ego, really unhinged false ego or complete false ego. And then people become, they begin to experience these happiness and distress, desire and hate, and they have all these different beliefs. Most of them are false, and they have awareness, but their awareness is not functioning properly. So they don't understand the existence of the soul and the super soul. They just see the body, and that puts everyone in complete illusion. So it says, one who desires to know the 24 elements in detail, along with their interactions, should study the philosophy in more detail. In the Bhagavad Gita, a summary only is given. So I will, in the next couple of days, show you where Srimad Bhagavatam gives more information about this. So that's he's saying here, that there's more information about this. The Bhagavad Gita is only a summary. The body is the representation of all these factors, these 24 elements, and there are changes of the body which are 6 in number. The body is born, it grows, it stays, it produces byproducts, meaning children, then it begins to decay, and at the last stage, it vanishes, or it dies, and it's no longer visible. Therefore, the field is a non-permanent material thing. These 24 elements and the material body is a non-permanent material thing. However, the Kshetragya, the knower of the field, the jiva, is the proprietor, and he's different. The jiva is eternal. It's not subject to all these changes that the body goes through. Okay, so then the next subject that's explained in the 13th chapter is called actually real knowledge. Now, there are 2 places where this is explained. I read yesterday and previously from the Bhagavad Gita, but it's also explained in the 10th mantra of the Ishopanishad. Well, this is what I wrote here, the 10th mantra, which explains exactly the same thing as in the Bhagavad Gita, but it's in a more simple form. So it says, Anyadebhur vidyaya, anyadahura vidyaya, itisrusrumadhiranam yenastad vichachakshire. The wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge, and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nescience or ignorance. So, we're going to see that modern education is teaching the culture of ignorance, not knowledge. But now we're going to learn what is actually knowledge. And here it goes. It says, as advised in chapter 13 of Bhagavad Gita 13, 8 to 12, one should culture knowledge in the following way. 1. One should become a perfect gentleman or lady and learn to give proper respect to others. 2. One should not pose himself as a religionist simply for name and fame. 3. One should not become a source of anxiety to others by the actions of his body, by the thoughts of his mind, or by his words. 4. One should learn forbearance. In other words, forbearance is a way of saying tolerance, even in the face of provocation from others. Number 5. One should learn to avoid duplicity. Duplicity means cheating, lying, misrepresenting things in his dealings with others. 6. One should search out a bona fide spiritual master who can lead him gradually to the stage of spiritual realization, and one must submit himself to such a spiritual master. Render him service and ask relevant questions. 7. In order to approach the platform of self-realization, one must follow the regulative principles enjoined in the revealed scriptures. 8. One must be fixed in the tenets of the revealed scriptures. 9. One should completely refrain from practices which are detrimental to the interest of self-realization. 10. One should not accept more than he requires for the maintenance of the body. 11. One should not falsely identify himself with the gross material body, nor should one consider those who are related to his body to be his own. 12. One should always remember that as long as he has a material body, he must face the miseries of repeated birth, old age, disease, and death. There is no use in making plans to get rid of these miseries of the material body. The best course is to find out the means by which one may regain his spiritual identity. Okay. "13. One should not be attached to more than the necessities of life required for spiritual advancement. 14. One should not be more attached to wife, children, or husband and home than the revealed scriptures ordain." So that means there's nothing wrong with being attached to your family as long as the family is Krishna conscious. But one should not become obsessed by that attachment. And because of that, I mean, I've seen this many times when family members put so much pressure on a person who's wanting to become a devotee that they actually stop trying to be a devotee because of all that family pressure. 16. One should become an unalloyed devotee of the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and serve him with rapt attention. 17. One should develop a liking for residence in a secluded place with a calm and quiet atmosphere, favorable for spiritual culture, and one should avoid congested places where non-devotees congregate. 18. One should become a scientist or philosopher and conduct research into spiritual knowledge, recognizing that spiritual knowledge is permanent, whereas the material knowledge ends with the death of the body. These 18 items, there's actually 20, but we'll discuss that another time. These 18 items combine to form a gradual process by which real knowledge can be developed. Except for these, all other methods are considered to be in the category of nescience or ignorance. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, a great acharya, maintained that all forms of material knowledge are merely external features of the illusory energy, and that by culturing them, one becomes no better than an ass. This same principle is found here in Sri Upanishad. By advancement of material knowledge, modern man is simply being converted into an ass. Some materialistic politicians and spiritual guys decry the present system of civilization as satanic, but unfortunately they do not care about the culture of real knowledge, as it is described in the Bhagavad Gita. Thus, they cannot change the satanic situation. So this is the case of almost all the politicians. There are many politicians who say, oh, the country's going in the wrong direction, blah, 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 blah. But then they say, well, we have to develop more industry, we have to do more research and more technology. That's not the solution. See, so although they see things are not going the right direction, their solution is always technology, industry, making more money, making more profit, this thing, that thing. So they're not actually going to stop anything from deteriorating. Some materialistic politicians and spiritual guys decry the present system of civilization as satanic, but unfortunately they do not care about the culture of real knowledge, as it is described in the Bhagavad Gita. Thus they cannot change the satanic. Satanic means demoniac or evil situation. In the modern society, even a boy thinks himself self-sufficient and pays no respect to elderly men, due to the wrong type of education being imparted in our universities. Boys all over the world are giving their elders headaches. Thus, Sri Upanishad very strongly warns that the culture of ignorance, or nescience, is different than the culture of knowledge. The universities are, so to speak, centers of ignorance only. Consequently, scientists are busy discovering lethal weapons to wipe out the existence of other countries. University students today are not given instructions in the regulative principles of brahmacharya, celibate student life, nor do they have any faith in any scriptural injunctions. Religious principles are taught for the sake of name and fame only, and not for the sake of practical action. Thus, there is animosity not only in social and political fields, but in the field of religion as well. Nationalism has developed in different parts of the world due to the cultivation of ignorance by the general people. No one considers this tiny earth is just a lump of matter floating in immeasurable space along with many other lumps. In comparison to the vastness of space, these material lumps are like dust particles in the air. Because God has kindly made these lumps of matter complete in themselves, they are perfectly equipped with all necessities for floating in space. The drivers of our spaceships may be very proud of their achievements, but they do not consider the supreme driver of these greater, more gigantic spaceships called planets. There are innumerable suns and innumerable planetary systems also. As infinitesimal parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, we small creatures are trying to dominate these unlimited planets. Thus, we take repeated birth and death and are generally frustrated by old age and disease. The span of human life is scheduled for about 100 years, although it's gradually decreasing to 20 or 30 years. Thanks to the culture of ignorance, befooled men have created their own nations within these planets in order to grasp sense enjoyment more effectively for these few years. Such foolish people draw up various plans to render national demarcations perfectly, a task that is totally impossible. In other words, they make different countries and with boundaries and so forth. Yet, for this purpose, each and every nation has become a source of anxiety for others. More than 50% of the nation's energy is devoted to defense measures and thus spoiled. No one cares for the cultivation of real knowledge, yet people are falsely proud of being advanced in both material and spiritual knowledge. Sri Ishopanishad warns us of this faulty type of education, and the Bhagavad Gita gives instructions as to the development of real knowledge. This mantra states that the instructions of Vidya, knowledge, must be acquired from a dhira. A dhira is one who is not disturbed by material illusion. No one can be undisturbed unless he is perfectly spiritually realized, at which time one neither hankers nor laments for anything. A dhira realizes that the material body and mind he has acquired by chance through material association are but foreign elements. Therefore, he simply makes the best use of a bad bargain. The material body and mind are bad bargains for the spiritual living entity. The living entity has actual functions in the living spiritual world, but this material world is dead. As long as the living spiritual sparks manipulate the dead lumps of matter, the dead world appears to be a living world. Actually, it is the living souls, the parts and parcels of the Supreme Living Being who move the world. The Dhiras have come to know all these facts by hearing them from superior authorities and have realized this knowledge by following the regulative principles. No meat, no intoxication, no illicit sex, no gambling. To follow the regulative principles, one must take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master. The spiritual master will always encourage you to follow the regulative principles and chant Hare Krishna and engage in devotional service. The transcendental message and regulative principles come down from the spiritual master to the disciple. Such knowledge does not come in the hazardous way of ignorant education. One can become a dhira, someone who's not disturbed by anything, only by submissively hearing from a bona fide spiritual master. Arjuna, for example, became a dhira by submissively hearing from Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead himself. Thus, the perfect disciple must be like Arjuna, and the spiritual master must be as good as the Lord himself. This is the process of learning vidya, knowledge, from the dhira, the undisturbed. An adhira, one who has not undergone the training of a dhira, cannot be an instructive leader. Modern politicians who pose themselves as dhiras are actually adhiras, and one cannot expect perfect knowledge from them. They are simply busy seeing to their own remuneration in dollars and cents. How then can they lead the mass of people to the right path of self-realization? Thus one must hear submissively from a dhira in order to attain actual education. So that last part there is a good description of Trump and Biden. They're both adhiras. They're all both adhiras. They both are upset all the time. They can't really lead people because they have too many selfish desires. Okay, so this is very interesting. Here, this is for you. We must study this very carefully. And then there's more in this chapter, which we'll be discussing the next couple of days. If you understand the 13th chapter, you're fixed in devotional service the rest of your life. It's very, very thorough explanation of what is reality and what is not reality, what is knowledge, what is not knowledge, who we are actually, as opposed to who we're pretending to be due to ignorance. So it's very important. Now I'm going to show you something very interesting. We have to put this, put it on the screen. Okay, so this is news, Fox News today. Newark became sister cities with a fake country. Here, give this to Jim. You're going to see now why India is in a big mess. Big, big mess. This is like a joke, what you're going to see now. The biggest joke in the world.
What is the news program?
Huh?
What is the news?
Newark, W-A-R-K, Newark. Well, that's all right. He's going to put it on the board. This is on Fox News. Huh?
Nityananda Swami.
Yeah. This is like a joke, you know, but it's a serious nonsense joke. It just shows you why India's in a mess. People like this.
He has this fake country called Kailasa.
Some years ago, his disciples were coming here trying to convince me that I should accept him as the present avatar of Krishna. This is what we're up against, you know. There's so much nonsense. It's unbelievable. And it just gets worse. It doesn't get better. Every time one falls down, another one comes. Another Bhagavan appears. Okay, you have it? We should send this to everybody. Okay, go ahead, turn it on. What? It's loading? No, you have to click, you have to click on the voice. It's no, you have to click on it. It's an advertisement. That's an advertisement. Okay, go ahead. You should see on the top to the right hand side, there's a little thing you click on, you'll see the noise will come on. Oh no, it's down on the bottom there.
This is full, right? The voice.
No, it's not right.
Something has to increase.
That's I'm sorry.
Voice from here?
Huh?
Put to
Open
the,
the voice from in laptop?
You have the voice?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
put on the speaker maybe.
I mean, I've seen it. It's for you. I've already seen this. I don't need that. You look at
Sound.
it. Just keep to this one.
They get duped. So I guess you know why I'm here. I need to purchase something.
Like a fridge?
No. Successful people are book smart and street smart. You can be successful with one or the other, but everybody wants to be successful in life. The most successful people are book smart and street smart. You can be successful with one or the other. You can have it all. The problem with book smart people, though, is they get duped. So I guess you know why I'm here. I need to purchase something.
Like a fridge?
No. I wanted to buy some weed. Some
What?
grass weed.
Makes you think we'd have weed?
In order to run an American city, you need a mayor who's book smart and street smart. You need a city council that's at least street smart. Most American cities have a lot of street smart politicians. They know how to read people, they know who to do favors for, and they can crank the political machine into action. Newark, New Jersey is a perfect example. It's the biggest city in New Jersey. It's right outside of Manhattan. You got Trump, you got shipping, you got an international airport. Everything from commuters to blue collars to finance. Newark, New Jersey gave us Cory Booker. That's not necessarily something they should be proud of, but I'm just saying Newark's a player. But Newark, New Jersey just got duped. And not by just some crooked lobbyist or some political fraudster. You know how some cities have sister cities? Like Birmingham, Alabama is sister cities with Ashan, China. They have some cultural connection. There's some sort of cultural connectivity, and they have a nice little international relationship where delegations come over, they celebrate each other, their art, their shared sacrifice, and some more, whatever. You've heard of sister cities. Well, Newark, New Jersey became sister cities with a fake country.
It had all the makings of a diplomatic ceremony. Newark Mayor Ross Baraka, alongside a representative from the United States of Kailasa, signing a cultural trade agreement to become sister cities in January.
Officially sister cities.
Kailasa calling it a bilateral agreement with the United States of America. So you might be wondering, where is the United States of Kailasa? Turns out it doesn't exist.
The city of Newark, New Jersey just got scammed into becoming a sister city for the Hindu nation of Kailasa. But the problem is the nation of Kailasa doesn't exist, and it never did. Newark thought Kailasa was a Hindu nation just off the coast of Ecuador. No one in the entire Newark government thought to themselves, there's a Hindu island off the coast of South America? No one at the city council of Newark thought, hey, I've never heard of this country. What's their food like? What's their clothing look like? Are there beaches or rainforests in Kailasa? Let me just do a Google search before we get these guys into a room and make them our sister city. No. Instead, they ran with it. Not only did they get duped, but they got duped by a self-proclaimed fake kind of Kailasa, a serial rapist.
The guru, with dozens of videos on a YouTube channel documenting his teachings, claims he left India in 2019 to seek protection. He was arrested there years earlier, accused of sexual assault charges by 5 women who say he abused them at a religious retreat. Local reports say he appealed the charges and eventually fled India.
So his name we're not even going to try to pronounce, but this guy's been on the run for over 4 years after being accused of brutally raping people in India. So what's he been doing? Well, he's been running around the country acting like an Indian guru, posting spiritual videos and going to places like Newark, New Jersey to sign cultural trade agreements. Now we hear Newark isn't the only city that he's targeted, and we're working on confirming that. We'll have an investigation tomorrow. And these people even somehow snuck into a UN conference in Geneva this February, looking for protection for their supreme pontiff of Hinduism, the guy with the rape charges.
I'm here representing the United States of Kailasa. I'm the permanent ambassador. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism and Kailasa have gone through intense persecution and human rights violation.
Even the UN thought, there's something a little fishy with this guy. Sniffed him out, but they got duped. But Newark, on the other hand, got caught with their pants down. Now, they're saying, oops, putting out this statement. Although this was a regrettable incident, the city of Newark remains committed to partnering with people from diverse cultures in order to enrich each other with connectivity, support, and mutual respect. In other words, if we'd only use Google.
Back in New Jersey, a few days after this ceremony, the city says it realized it had been deceived, calling it, quote, a regrettable incident. City council members passing a unanimous motion to dissolve the agreement, and one city council member calling for better vetting in the future. Hopefully, that includes a Google search.
Better vetting. How about just vetting? Not even Fetterman would have fallen for this. But Brick City seems to be as dumb as a brick. No one asked any questions. The people on the city council of Newark don't know geography or religion. But usually when you're not book smart, you ask questions, due diligence. You don't get duped and you ask Google. But Newark was too afraid to even ask. They were so desperate to become a sister city with such an exotic Hindu place that they figured, we're just going to agree to this and then celebrate. We'll even name a little street Kailasa, just to show other cities how woke we are. We'll even throw them a parade along with the 20 other ethnic parades we host every summer. They'll say yes to anything, as long as money keeps flowing into their pockets and they look like global citizens. Look at how inclusive we are. We're sister cities with a Hindu island. Newark shatters. As long as they do that, Newark's mayor, Ras Baraka, can keep forgetting to disclose almost $400,000 in contributions. Maybe not the cleanest mayor Newark's ever had. Oops, I didn't have time to disclose that donation. Was too busy tearing down a racist Christopher Columbus statue in the town square. That's right. They've teared down a Christopher Columbus statue. And now they're sister cities with a fake Hindu nation. This is the same city who gave us Cory Booker, as we said. We're reaching out to Cory Booker's office to see what he thinks of this. This is a city that voted about 90% for Joe Biden in 2020. And all they care about is virtue signaling. And this really isn't a story about just Newark, New Jersey. This is a story about our whole country. Democrats will do just about anything, say just about anything, sign just about anything, all to say they shattered some glass ceilings. They'll say, let's defund the police. The world's going to end in 10 years. Windmills will work off the coast just to say they did their part. and they won't question a thing. They'll just fall for it because they don't want to look dumb, or they don't want to look not woke, or they're too scared of getting canceled.
Okay, that's good.
And these are the people that are telling us what to do.
Turn it off. Yeah, India's in great shape. This guy buys an island off the coast of South America. He calls it a country. Now he goes around the world advertising it as a country, and he's the leader. He goes to the UN, he goes to New York City and other places, and gets all this, what do you call, attention, as if he's real. But actually, he's just a rapist and a fugitive. You know, he ran away from India so he wouldn't be arrested. This is crazy, completely crazy. But that's where we are. Okay, so
One thing is what he does, but imagine all the followers still.
they'll still follow him. They're standing in money. How did he buy that island? That's right. He has plenty of followers. They're stupid like anything. He's got followers. He's got a temple here in
It's still
Issachar.
running.
Huh?
running?
I think so. It's still running in Redmond. There is one temple.
That's right. It's Issachar.
Oh, long time back it was in Redmond, Maharaj.
Oh, maybe, yeah, but
Like 10 years or 12 years back.
yeah, but now it's Issachar.
Oh, the notice.
Yeah. Well, now you know why India has a mess. All these man gods. Okay, let's have Aarti. Never a dull moment.
It's amazing how we.
Send it to everybody. You can start. You can start. Shri Guru.
Sri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Vakati Sadma
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma
Bando Moi Savadana Mate
Bando Mui Savadana Mate
Jahara Prasade Bhae E Bhava Toriya Jae
Janada Prasade Bhai Bhavatoriya Jai
Krishna Prapti Hoye Jahan Hoite
Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite
Guru Mukh Padma Vakya Chitte Koriya Ekya
Guru Mukha Padma Bhagya Chitete Koriya Akya
Arena Kori Ho Mane Asha
Arana Koriya Mane Asa
Sri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttama Gati
Shri Guru Charane Rati Ese utamagati.
जे प्रसाद पूरे सर्वे आशा
E prasade pure sarva asa.
चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
चक्षुदान दिला जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो
हृदय ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो
प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते
प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते
वेद गाय जहाँ राचरितो
वेद का जनर चरितो
श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम ज्ञानारा बंधु
श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अदन जनर बंधु
लोकनाथ लोकेरा जीवाना
लोकनाथ लोकेरा जीवाना
हाँ हाँ प्रभु करो दया देहो मोरे पद छाया
आहा प्रभु कोरा दोया देहा मोरे पद छाया
ए बेजास घुसुक त्रिभुवाना
ए बेयास कुसुचि भुवाना
शिला प्रभुपाद पतित पवाना
शिला प्रभुपाद पतित पवाना
नमः ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांता स्वामी निति नामिने
ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांता स्वामी निति नामिने
नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे
नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे
जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा
जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
Bolo Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare.
जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा श्रील प्रभुपदा
Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jai Prabhupada.
जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा
Jai Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva, Guru Deva, Jai Guru Deva.
नित्य गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल
Nitai Gora Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gora Hari Bol, Nitai Gora Hari Bol, Tagore Premanandi Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare,
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Jai, Jai. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him, ecstatic prema emanates. By him, ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scripture sings of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor, and the Lord and master of the devotees. O Lokanatha Goswami, O Master, be merciful unto me. Give me the shade of lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the three worlds. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Namaste, Saraswati Devi. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Thank you very much. No, no, no. The scriptures are already there. This is all scripture what I gave you. Right? So then you have to learn this.